So I heard quite an alarming statistic on the radio the other day. Only 41 days left until Christmas. What does that do for you? For me, it caused immediate anxiety. I'm thinking in my head, doing the calculations, how many paydays is that until Christmas? Is that shopping days left or actual days left until Christmas? Now my wife, on the other hand, totally different experience, right? She gets excited when she hears that countdown to Christmas. She loves the day, and even more so, she loves all the days leading up to that day. Granted, she doesn't handle the checkbook quite like I do, but what does it do for you? The countdown to Christmas, does that excite you? What does it invoke for you? Does it invoke anxiety? Dread? Ho-hum? Bah humbug? Whatever it does for you, a countdown of days seems to highlight for all of us a sense of urgency. However you experience that, a sense of urgency. By the way, it's only 37 more days left until Christmas. And the psalmist prays for us today in Psalm 90. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. The countdown to Christmas for the church actually begins in 2 weeks with Advent, but for many, the countdown to Christmas began on November 1st. I guess it really doesn't matter when you begin the countdown so much as we all agree upon the end date, right? It's easy to number our days when we all know that the day is December 25th, right? But for our lives, it's not so easy. It's a little bit harder. You bring up the countdown to Christmas, and it invokes anxiety in some and excitement in others, but bring up the prospect of retirement, and it can do the same thing. Last week, I heard someone say, 2 years, and I'm counting down every day. She's excited to retirement day. In the same week, I heard someone say, boy, I hope I get to retire. But there's so much to consider. Have I saved enough? What will the markets do? And of course, that calculation would be easier to make if we only knew the end date. The missing variable in all of our retirement calculations is, how long will we live? And here we have the crux of the human condition. We will all die one day. We just don't know when that end date will be. Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a wise heart. I know of a man who had a wise financial mind. Right out of college, he landed a very lucrative professional job with an international finance company. And at age 22, he received a healthy salary and invested half of every paycheck into his retirement plan. The goal of his retirement plan, the wisdom in his counting of his days, was to retire by age 50. And then, in his 40s, with his young children still living at home, his wife was diagnosed with cancer. He decided he liked working, and retiring at 50 is just too young anyways. But more importantly, he knew in a real way, a deep and pervasive kind of knowing that doesn't teach us easily, the very preciousness of each day and all that finds us in it so valuable. He started using some of that retirement nest egg to fund trips and experiences for his family to share together in the days that they knew they still had left together. To count their days, but to also to make their days count. Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a wise heart. No one knows how many days we have left. And I often wonder if we did, would it make a difference? The music video for the Nickelback song Savin' Me has an interesting element to it. There's a man that has a vision to see what no one else can see. A countdown clock that rests upon everyone's head. A countdown clock for the remaining life they have left to live. He sees a man crossing a busy street whose countdown clock is close to zero, and he pulls him back away from the traffic right before a car could hit him. He saved that man from death. That man cheated death. And then we find out that that man now has the same vision of a countdown clock above everyone else's head of how much life they have left to live. Well, as that video unfolds, we learn that this knowledge becomes a curse, not a gift. He finally finds a woman and saves her from her impending death, but not to pass along the gift, but to pass along the burden. Would you really want to know? How would it affect your living? Should it affect your living? Teach us to count our days so that we may gain a wise heart. We live in a culture that seeks to defy death, or at least to deny it as much as we can. 70 is the new 50, the slogan tells us, especially if we buy this anti-aging cream and this hair dye and this midlife crisis car. Now, to be sure, 70 is the new 50. Thanks to many medical and technological advances, 70 is actually the new 30. If you think about, at the height of the Roman Empire, the average life expectancy was just shy of 30 years old. The psalmist here guesses at the span of life, 70 years or perhaps 80 if you're strong. And in the U.S., that tracks today. According to the CDC, the average life expectancy of an American in 2022 is 76.4 years old. But in spite of all of our advancements in technology and our overall abilities to take better care of ourselves, that number has dropped 2.7 years on average since the year 2020, representing the largest 2-year consecutive drop in U.S. life expectancy since 1929 to 23. What is the span of a life? 30? 50? 105? The psalmist inquires and then puts it into perspective. Right? The psalmist says it's a lot of toil and a lot of trouble, and I would add a lot of good too, but in perspective, even if life expectancy was 1,000 years, that's like the blink of an eye. To God, 1,000 years passes by like a day that has just gone by. And man, isn't that true? as you know it, the older that you get and the more life that you see, it all goes by so fast. It seems just like yesterday. And it all goes by so quick, in the blink of an eye. Teach us to count our days so that we may gain a wise heart. Venerated teacher of preachers, Thomas Long, says that death is a defining characteristic of being human. To deny it or to defy it is to defy our humanity, and is a very big way in which we seem to get it wrong. Death does come for us all, but is it our curse? The faith goes back to the book of Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and are expelled from Eden, and we typically read that as our punishment. We read that as our curse. But the rabbinic tradition points out that there are actually two trees in the center of that garden. One is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, of which they ate from, and two, the other is the tree of life. What would have happened if humans would have eaten from that fruit and lived forever? See, we think immortality is what we want, but pause for a moment and consider the quality of life if we never died. And consider what atrocities would be committed if death was no consequence. What kind of life would there be if there were no death? Is death really our curse? Well, the rabbis teach us that the expulsion from the garden was not punishment, it was our protection. And that death, as a consequence of life, is a great teacher and not to be feared. Psalm 90 puts the frailty and relative shortness of life in the context of the vastness of divine life in order to teach us, right? Not to number our days, that's not necessarily the goal. The goal is wisdom, a wise heart, or as some wisdom I've gleaned over the years has told me, we cannot add days to our life, but perhaps we can add life to our days. And I first learned that. It was taught to me in the face of the impending death of one of the saints of this church. We cannot add days to our life, but we can add life to our days. Death has been called the great equalizer, but can it also be called the teacher of wisdom? Brian Erickson writes, "It is precisely our human frailty that makes life so precious. It is our mortality and the urgency of that ticking time clock that makes each moment matter. Death makes earthly life precious because it reminds us each of us of each day's preciousness and the value of all that we find in it, and it shall not be wasted. When we live as if we will never die, we tend to waste the life we have worrying about things that in the grand span of time really don't matter. Fretting over things that are beyond our control. And we become consumed by things that are not eternal. Perhaps that's why wisdom comes to the elders, or as we like to refer to our older members as those with the gift of years. Many have said that Psalm 90 is a bummer kind of a text. To talk about one's mortality, one's toil and struggle, and how it ends with a moan. The Old Testament professor Rolf Jacobson reminds us that all of this occurs under God's providence and care. To put a life, as short as it is, in the context of nothingness, makes the same of life. it's all for nothing. Rolf Jacobson reminds us that of this direct link between the honesty of life's shortness and the vastness of divine life is, in fact, the wisdom tradition. Life matters when it is in the context of the life of God who thinks your life matters. In the context of God's purposes, life has purpose. In the context of the joy of God's goodness, life finds joy. Even in the work of God, our life's work is established and it carries on. And even at the end of our life in God, life carries on. At the same time, a family gathers in a hospital room to say goodbye to their loved one. In the room right below them, a baby cries its first cry. And as the last leaf falls on the tree outside of that window, in the southern hemisphere, a cocoon opens up, and as it's transformed, it takes its first flight. Life continues on in this grand scheme of God's design. We play a part in it, however small. It is not insignificant. Even under the judgment of God, our life can be judged with meaningfulness and hope. In that same hospital, this time over in the oncology unit, a 30-year-old man is dying from leukemia, and he's having an urgent conversation with his doctor. I don't know if I'm afraid of death, the young man says to his doctor. What I'm really afraid of is the incompleteness of my life. That's an understandable fear. Fear, however, is based in the belief that there is not enough. Not enough joy, not enough strength, not enough nourishment, not enough love, not enough time, not enough me. St. Augustine famously wrote, "Our hearts are truly restless, Lord, until we find our rest in Thee." You know, the seventh day of creation, the Sabbath day, that day where creation was finally marked as complete, is finally a day of rest. St. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 13, "Prophecies, they cease. Tongues, they will be stilled. Knowledge, it will pass away. But when completeness comes, when the fullness of creation comes, when the end of a life finds its rest, that is not its end. If the real fear of death is the incompleteness of life, then hear the first words of Easter morning resurrection: do not be afraid." We're so anxious and fearful about our life, as short and fragile as it is, that it will end. Jesus reminds us this is how it will end. Resurrection, Easter morning, is how it will end. Completeness comes. Life continues. Not an end, but a new beginning. Not death, but a resurrection. Lord, you have been our dwelling place, our home. The psalmist begins, and this is how it all began, and this is how it will all be completed. In the Lord, who is our home. Death is not the curse to be escaped. Death is the great teacher to help us count our days and to give us a wise heart in them. When life is not wasted, nor lived in the foolishness of self-deception or self-justification, nor in the idle living or wasteful sharing, but in the wisdom of life as it really is precious, valuable, worth sharing. Our place in it, not a status earned, but of grace freely given. Satisfy us in the morning, the psalmist prays for us, with your unfailing love. Make us glad for as many days as we have seen affliction, for as many years as we have seen trouble. You have called us children, O God. Now show us your splendor. Establish the work of our hands. Yes, grant success for the toil of our living. The work of our hands, the toil of our living, can make a lasting difference indeed when the Eternal One has blessed it. Each day that passes more quickly than the day before, teach us, O God, to number our days, so that we may gain a wise heart and grow closer to the heart of God, in whom we find our rest, our completeness, until we return to that from which we came, the home of God, where there is more than enough, nothing to be afraid of, life abundant, and life eternal in Jesus Christ our Lord. By the way, now it's only 36 more days till Christmas. Live them wisely. Amen.
Lord, I stretch my hands to you.